If you believe that evil should never go unpunished, subscribe to this channel and share this video with your loved ones and families. Only those who want to turn a blind eye won't join the fight for justice. Let us quickly jump back into the sad story of the Bennett's family. Aurora, Colorado, in the 1980s, a city on the rise, bustling with optimism and suburban charm. Back then, Aurora was the perfect blend of picturesque landscapes and growing opportunity. Streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, white picket fences, and a strong sense of community. Families waved to one another from their porches, and neighbors shared cups of coffee over backyard fences. To outsiders, it seemed like nothing bad could happen here. A safe haven for raising children and building dreams. Among these hopeful families was the Bennetts. Bruce Bennett was a 27-year-old husband and father, a man who believed in hard work, family, and securing a bright future for those he loved. A Navy veteran, Bruce had served his country with honor before transitioning into civilian life. His disciplined yet compassionate nature made him a favorite among friends and coworkers. He was pursuing a career at his family's furniture store, determined to build something lasting for his loved ones. Debra Bennett, Bruce's wife, was 26 years old. She was a devoted mother and a kind-hearted woman whose warm smile could light up a room. Known for her patience and nurturing spirit, Debra balanced her days between caring for their two daughters and supporting Bruce's ambitions. Together, they were partners in every sense of the word, united by love and their shared dreams of a happy, stable life. Their children, Melissa and Vanessa, were the heart of the Bennett home. 7-year-old Melissa was bright, curious, and full of energy. She loved school and often spoke about wanting to be a teacher when she grew up. Vanessa, just 3 years old, was still discovering the world with the wide-eyed wonder only a toddler could possess. The two sisters were inseparable, their giggles filling the house with life and joy. The Bennetts had recently moved into their modest home on East Center Drive, a quiet street in a neighborhood where everyone knew each other by name. The house wasn't extravagant, but it was theirs, a sanctuary where they could watch their daughters grow up and create countless memories. The neighborhood itself seemed idyllic. Families left their doors unlocked. Children played outside until dusk, and everyone kept an eye out for one another. Aurora was the kind of place where bad news felt like something that happened elsewhere, never here. It was a bubble of security, where life moved at a comfortable, predictable pace. But behind the facade of serenity, something unimaginable was about to happen. January 16, 1984, started like any other day. The winter air was crisp, and the neighborhood was slowly coming to life as residents prepared for their routines. But something seemed off at the Bennett household. The curtains remained drawn, and the driveway was eerily empty. That morning, Bruce's mother, concerned after her son failed to show up for work, decided to check on the family. What she found inside would haunt her forever. As she stepped into the Bennett home, the silence was suffocating. The once warm and lively house now felt cold, as if the life had been drained from its very walls. She moved through the rooms, calling out for Bruce, Debra, and the children. When she reached the bedrooms, her worst fears were realized. Bruce was found first, lying motionless and bloodied. His injuries were horrific, suggesting he had fought desperately to protect his family. Debra's lifeless body was discovered next, and the scene around her told a story of unspeakable violence. 7-year-old Melissa, too, was found brutally murdered, a victim of the same unimaginable cruelty. And then, in a final, faint glimmer of hope, the youngest daughter, Vanessa, was found clinging to life despite her devastating injuries. The once safe neighborhood of Aurora was now the site of one of the most brutal crimes in Colorado's history. Word spread quickly, and the community was left reeling. How could something so horrifying happen here? Neighbors gathered in disbelief, their faces pale with fear and confusion. The Bennett family had been beloved, a symbol of everything good and hopeful about Aurora. Now, their story was a nightmare that shattered the illusion of safety for everyone. The questions came fast and unrelenting. Who could commit such an atrocity? Was it a targeted attack, or was the entire neighborhood at risk? Parents held their children closer that night, and doors that were once left unlocked were now bolted tight. Aurora would never be the same. But as the police began their investigation, they would find more questions than answers. And for decades, the truth would remain hidden. If you think the terror of the Bennett family's massacre should be remembered, and justice finally delivered, subscribe now. Silence only protects the guilty. January 15, 1984, was an ordinary winter evening in Aurora, Colorado. Inside the Bennett home on East Center Drive, the family was likely winding down from a quiet Sunday. Bruce, Debra, and their two young daughters, Melissa and Vanessa, had no reason to suspect that their lives were about to intersect with a nightmare. What happened that night would defy logic, reason, and humanity, leaving behind only devastation and unanswered questions. It's easy to imagine the final moments of peace inside the Bennett home. Bruce might have been reading a bedtime story to Melissa, her 7-year-old imagination lighting up with wonder. Debra, always attentive, might have been tucking Vanessa into her crib, ensuring her youngest daughter felt safe and warm before drifting off to sleep. The home, like so many others in the neighborhood, was a sanctuary, a place where laughter echoed and dreams were nurtured. But just as the family was enveloped in the comfort of their routines, an intruder was already closing in. Sometime in the dead of night, a shadow crossed the threshold of the Bennett home. The intruder, later identified as Alexander Ewing, gained entry to the house with chilling ease. Armed with a hammer, his intentions were not robbery or petty theft. What he sought that night was far darker, more sinister, and ultimately incomprehensible. Evidence would later suggest that Ewing had prowled the neighborhood, choosing the Bennett family at random. There was no known connection, no discernible motive, just the unrelenting, senseless violence that would soon unfold. The details of the attack are almost too horrifying to recount, but they are necessary to understand the magnitude of the crime. Bruce Bennett was the first to confront the intruder. A former Navy serviceman, Bruce fought valiantly to protect his family. Bruises, lacerations, and defensive wounds told the story of a desperate struggle. But Ewing was relentless, and Bruce ultimately succumbed to the savage blows of the hammer. Debra was next. Her injuries suggested that she, too, fought back with everything she had to protect her daughters. But the attacker's rage was unyielding, leaving no room for mercy. 7-year-old Melissa, who should have been dreaming of school and playtime with friends, was subjected to unimaginable cruelty. Evidence indicated that she was sexually assaulted before being bludgeoned to death. The innocence of a child, obliterated in an act of pure evil. And then there was Vanessa, the family's 3-year-old. She, too, suffered severe injuries, skull fractures, and other trauma that should have been fatal. But somehow, miraculously, Vanessa clung to life. She would later be found by first responders, her small, fragile body a testament to an almost unfathomable resilience. By the time the sun rose on January 16th, the Bennett home was silent. What had once been a warm, loving household was now a crime scene drenched in blood and terror. The brutality of the crime shocked even the most seasoned investigators. Neighbors awoke to the chaos of police cars and crime scene tape, their quiet suburb now a place of fear and disbelief. Inside the home, forensic experts began piecing together the gruesome puzzle. Every room held evidence of the horror. Blood spatters on walls, broken furniture, and the hammer, Ewing's weapon of choice, left behind as a chilling reminder of his cruelty. Amid the darkness, Vanessa emerged as a symbol of resilience. Barely clinging to life, she was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked tirelessly to save her. Though she would survive, the injuries she sustained would leave both physical and emotional scars that would last a lifetime. Vanessa's survival, however, was not just a story of strength. It was also a haunting reminder of the life she would grow up without. The love and laughter of her parents and sister were taken from her in an instant, replaced by memories too painful for any child to bear. This is a question for you, my viewers. As investigators combed through the evidence, one question loomed larger than all others. Why? Why would anyone commit such an atrocity? And why the Bennetts? The randomness of the attack made it all the more terrifying. If it could happen to the Bennetts, it could happen to anyone. This wasn't a crime of passion or a targeted act of revenge. It was a senseless eruption of violence that defied explanation. For years, these questions would remain unanswered, leaving the community in a state of unease. The killer had vanished into the night, and with him, the answers to the questions that haunted Aurora. For most crimes, justice eventually finds its way to the surface. But for the Bennett family massacre, justice seemed like an elusive shadow. As investigators combed through the wreckage of that horrific January night, hope of a swift resolution quickly dimmed. The investigation into the Bennett murders would span decades, leaving behind a trail of dead ends, sleepless nights, and lives forever altered by a lack of closure. The Aurora Police Department was thrust into the spotlight as they began piecing together the unimaginable events of that night. The evidence collected was staggering in its brutality. The hammer, the blood spatter patterns, and the physical wounds on the victims painted a grim picture of the killer's ferocity. Detectives worked tirelessly, conducting countless interviews with neighbors, friends, and family. Witnesses were questioned, alibis were checked, and theories were crafted, but none of it led to a breakthrough. The randomness of the attack posed one of the biggest challenges. There was no personal connection, no motive that could explain the unrelenting violence. False leads began to pile up. Suspects were brought in for questioning only to be cleared after lengthy investigations. The case seemed to mock the efforts of even the most skilled investigators, who often found themselves retracing their steps, hoping they'd missed something, anything, that could unravel the mystery. As the years turned into decades, forensic science began to evolve in ways that were unimaginable in 1984. DNA analysis emerged as a revolutionary tool, and the Bennett case was revisited with fresh eyes. Evidence from the crime scene, blood samples, hair strands, and other traces left by the killer were re-examined in forensic labs. This sparked a sense of hope among investigators who had long carried the weight of this unsolved case. But while DNA technology brought clarity to other cold cases, the Bennett murders stubbornly remained unresolved. It wasn't until the late 2000s that a crucial breakthrough finally arrived. A national DNA database designed to link offenders to unsolved crimes provided the first real lead. Alexander Ewing's DNA was matched to the crime scene, tying him not only to the Bennett family massacre, but also to a string of similar crimes in Colorado. For the detectives who worked the Bennett case, the scars ran deep. Many described sleepless nights and a haunting sense of failure. They carried the weight of the community's grief, knowing that the killer's freedom meant the neighborhood's fear lingered like a shadow over the years. Some investigators retired before the case was solved, unable to reconcile their years of effort with the lack of closure. Others stayed on, driven by a stubborn determination to see justice served, no matter how long it took. For Vanessa, the impact of that night went beyond her physical scars. She grew up without her parents, without her sister, and with only fragmented memories of the life she had before the massacre. Surviving such an ordeal left her grappling with profound emotional trauma. In interviews years later, Vanessa described the ongoing struggle to find peace amid the pain. She became a living testament to resilience, but also a symbol of the lasting consequences of such violence. Every milestone, graduations, birthdays, and weddings, was accompanied by an unfillable void where her family should have been. For the extended Bennett family, the loss reverberated through generations. Bruce and Debra's parents, siblings, and relatives were left to grapple with grief that never truly healed. The community, too, bore the scars of the massacre. Neighbors who once felt safe in their suburban enclave now locked their doors, kept their children closer, and lived with the constant question, could it happen again? Lingering frustrations and new questions. Even after the DNA match identified Alexander Ewing as the killer, frustrations lingered. Why had it taken so long? What failures in the justice system allowed him to remain free for decades after committing such heinous crimes? And what could be done to ensure no other family would have to endure the same pain? The arrest brought a sense of relief, but it didn't erase the decades of unanswered questions, nor did it undo the suffering that Vanessa and others had endured. For 34 years, the Bennett family massacre haunted Aurora, Colorado, as a symbol of fear and frustration. A case that seemed destined to remain unsolved finally took a groundbreaking turn in 2018. The breakthrough was not the result of luck, but a revolution in DNA technology that brought clarity to decades of darkness. In 2018, a DNA match identified Alexander Ewing a name that sent ripples through both the community and law enforcement. Forensic advancements had turned once inconclusive evidence into an irrefutable connection. Ewing wasn't just linked to the Bennett murders. His DNA tied him to a spree of violent crimes in Colorado, including the murder of Patricia Louise Smith 6 days before the Bennett family's tragedy. These crimes, characterized by brutal hammer attacks, pointed to a predator who had eluded justice for decades. Law enforcement finally had a face, a name, and an undeniable link. But the question remained: how had he evaded capture for so long? The narrative took a chilling twist when details of Ewing's life emerged. He had been arrested multiple times for unrelated crimes. In fact, at the time of his arrest for the Bennett case, Ewing was already serving a prison sentence in Nevada for an attempted murder committed later in 1984. The revelation that such a dangerous individual had been active in the justice system, yet never connected to his earlier crimes, raised troubling questions. Had the technology been available sooner, could the Bennett family's fate have been avoided? How many lives might have been spared? Ewing's identification was both a triumph of modern forensic science and an indictment of systemic failures in law enforcement. For decades, the lack of communication and technological limitations between jurisdictions allowed him to remain free after the brutal murders. Many questioned the delays in implementing national DNA databases that could have linked Ewing to the crimes sooner. His name and DNA were available within the justice system for years, yet it took until 2018 for the pieces to come together. The public's reaction was a mix of relief and anger. Relief that justice was finally within reach, and anger at the years of inaction and missed opportunities. Families of victims and members of the Aurora community demanded answers. Could the system have done better? Should the murders have been preventable? The moral and ethical questions. The revelation of Ewing's identity also brought forth moral and ethical dilemmas. If the technology to solve these cases had been available in the 1980s, would it have changed the course of history for the Bennett family and others? Could law enforcement have prevented the string of brutal crimes that followed? These questions weighed heavily on the investigators who had spent years chasing shadows and on a community that had endured decades of fear and grief. While the DNA revolution finally unmasked the ghost that haunted Aurora, it also forced a painful reckoning with the past. The identification of Alexander Ewing marked a turning point in the case. But closure came with a bitter taste. Decades had passed, and with them, the opportunity for many of the victims' loved ones to see justice served in their lifetimes. Still, the breakthrough was a testament to perseverance. Justice, delayed though it was, had finally caught up with a man who thought he had escaped it forever. 36 years after the brutal murders of the Bennett family, Alexander Ewing faced justice. It was a moment long overdue, a collision of technology, persistence, and an unyielding demand for answers. But as the trial unfolded, it was clear that this case was about more than just one man or one family. It was about the haunting question: was justice truly served, or had it come far too late to matter? In 2021, Alexander Ewing stood trial for the murders of Bruce, Debra, and Melissa Bennett. The courtroom was a battleground of emotions, a place where decades of grief, anger, and frustration poured out. Prosecutors painted a harrowing picture of the events that unfolded on that January night in 1984. They presented the DNA evidence that tied Ewing unequivocally to the crime scene. Witnesses recounted the terror that gripped Aurora during the killer's spree, while detectives spoke of the painstaking efforts to bring this case to justice. The defense, however, had little room to maneuver. Ewing's history of violence, coupled with the overwhelming DNA evidence, left little doubt of his guilt. Yet, the defense attempted to argue the limitations of memories and evidence from a crime that occurred nearly 4 decades earlier. The most powerful moments of the trial came not from the lawyers or experts, but from the voices of those who had lived in the shadow of this crime. Vanessa Bennett, the sole survivor of the attack, took the stand. Now in her 40s, Vanessa recounted the horrors of that night and the lifelong scars, both physical and emotional, that she bore. Her testimony silenced the courtroom. The resilience she displayed, despite everything she had endured, was both heartbreaking and inspiring. She spoke not just for herself but for her parents and sister, whose voices had been silenced forever. The community, too, had its say. Longtime residents of Aurora shared how the Bennett family massacre changed their sense of safety and trust. It wasn't just a crime. It was a wound that had never fully healed. Justice delayed. Is it justice denied? When the guilty verdict was finally read, there was no cheer, no celebration. Justice, while served, felt incomplete. For many, the delay had robbed the moment of its full impact. Bruce and Debra's parents, who had waited decades for this day, had passed away before they could see it. The case raised difficult questions. Should justice delayed still be celebrated as justice served? Or was the system's failure to act sooner a tragic injustice in itself? Ewing's sentencing ensured he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, but for many, it felt like too little, too late. The fact that he had been in custody for years without anyone realizing his connection to these heinous crimes was a bitter pill to swallow. The legacy of the Bennett family massacre. As the trial concluded, the case left an indelible mark, not just on Aurora but on the broader understanding of crime and justice. The Bennett family became a symbol of both the fragility of life and the importance of persistence in the pursuit of justice. Advances in forensic science, particularly in DNA technology, were hailed as heroes of the story. Yet, the case also highlighted systemic failures, from the lack of interjurisdictional communication to the delays in adopting national DNA databases. Vanessa Bennett emerged as a figure of resilience, a survivor who turned her pain into strength. Her story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit can endure. Lingering questions for the audience. As the case closed, one question remained. Was this simply the act of a random, unrepentant killer, or did it point to deeper societal failures? Could the system have stopped Ewing before he left so much devastation in his wake? The Bennett family massacre was a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for both unspeakable evil and unwavering resilience. It forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about safety, justice, and the fragility of the systems meant to protect us. And so, as the courtroom emptied and the case file was finally closed, the legacy of this tragedy lingered, a haunting tale of a family, a community, and a quest for justice that spanned decades. Closing words. This story may have found its resolution, but the questions it raises remain open. As we turn the page on the Bennett family massacre, we must ask ourselves, what does justice truly mean? And are we doing enough to ensure it comes not just eventually, but when it's needed most?